Welcome back to Generation Sick, the power, politics, and propaganda behind America's health crisis. Written by Dr. Vic Naumov. Copyright 2016. All rights reserved. Last episode, we met the man who designed the theory behind Hillary Care and Obamacare, and watched him spend decades publicly disowning what politicians built with his own ideas. Today, we're covering a bigger stretch of the book, chapters 11, 12, and 13. We're going to look at the uncomfortable legacy of the philanthropists who shaped modern medicine, the messy economics hiding underneath America's official statistics, and finally, the chapter Dr. Naumov considers one of the most important in the entire book: what health and personal responsibility for your own health actually mean.
Let's get into it.
Dr. Naumov opens chapter 11 with a blunt cultural reference, a line from the 1973 film Soylent Green, and uses it to set up a meditation on industrial-era monopolists like John D. Rockefeller, Thomas Edison, and Henry Ford. His point here isn't to paint these men as simple villains. He's upfront that historians like Ida Tarbell already wrote the definitive, scathing account of Rockefeller's business practices, and he recommends her work directly. What Dr. Naumov wants to add is narrower. His argument that shifting from running an oil monopoly to running a charitable foundation didn't mean Rockefeller stopped being driven by the same underlying instincts that built Standard Oil in the first place. He spends real time here being fair to both sides of the capitalism debate. He acknowledges that critics of the profit motive run from religious figures to economists across the political spectrum. But he also argues that market-driven innovation produced extraordinary cultural and technological abundance that a more centrally controlled system likely couldn't have. His point isn't that capitalism is evil. It's that unchecked monopoly power, dressed up in the language of charity, deserves real scrutiny rather than automatic gratitude. On that note, Dr. Naumov is candid about a genuinely uncomfortable piece of history. The early Rockefeller Foundation, in its first decades, funded research into population control and eugenics, a fact that is documented in the Foundation's own historical record. He doesn't dwell on it, but he doesn't let it pass unmentioned either. He sets that history directly against the Foundation's later, more celebrated achievements, most notably its central funding role in the Green Revolution, the mid-century agricultural technology push that dramatically increased food production across Mexico, Brazil, India, and the Philippines, helping to avert the kind of mass starvation that economists like Thomas Malthus and later Paul Ehrlich had once predicted as inevitable. He introduces Norman Borlaug here, the scientist often called the father of the Green Revolution, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970 for that work. Dr. Naumov describes Borlaug as a genuine optimist who believed every problem created by technology would eventually have a technological solution. But he also notes that Borlaug's legacy has been seriously challenged by critics who argue the Green Revolution encouraged unsustainable population growth and promoted farming practices, heavy pesticide use, industrial monoculture that have degraded land, air, and water over the long run. Dr. Naumov doesn't pretend this debate has a clean answer. He presents it as a real, ongoing argument about the trade-offs of technological progress. His takeaway from this chapter is less a verdict and more a caution that even genuinely good, productive philanthropic work, the kind that has measurably saved lives at a massive scale, can come bundled with assumptions and side effects that deserve a closer, more skeptical look than the official story usually gets. Chapter 12. which Dr. Naumov calls dark matter, turns from philanthropy to something more like skepticism about official numbers altogether. He opens with the old Mark Twain line about lies, damned lies, and statistics, and uses it to take aim at how government economic data gets compiled and reported. He's particularly critical of a budgeting technique called dynamic scoring, which factors projected economic behavior into official cost estimates for new legislation, a method that, in his view, leaves plenty of room for politically motivated assumptions to creep into numbers that are presented to the public as neutral and objective. From there, Dr. Naumov widens the lens to talk about how much of the American economy operates entirely outside of official statistics altogether. Informal labor, untaxed transactions, and the genuinely enormous classified budgets of intelligence and defense agencies, much of which the public will simply never have full visibility into. His broader point is that any time we're told a definitive economic figure, what something costs, what something saves, what the deficit will look like in 10 years, we should remember that a meaningful share of real economic activity in this country isn't actually being counted in the first place. He pairs this with a short reflection on how often the official story of major historical events turns out to be incomplete, contested, or flatly wrong in the public's mind, citing how differently nations remember the outcomes of the same wars and how much of America's own Cold War-era secrecy around programs and research the public still doesn't have full access to remains undisclosed even decades later. This sets up Dr. Naumov's discussion of Richard Nixon, a president he's deeply critical of throughout the book, on the grounds of Watergate and a broader pattern of secrecy and abuse of power. But here, Dr. Naumov focuses specifically on something with a direct healthcare legacy, Nixon's 1971 National Cancer Act, which formally launched what came to be called the War on Cancer. This is where Chapter 12's real argument lands. Dr. Naumov traces the origins of the American Cancer Society back to funding originally provided by John D. Rockefeller in 1913. The very same year Rockefeller's campaign to establish the Federal Reserve System was signed into law. From there, he makes a hard assessment of 50-plus years of cancer research funding, acknowledging that survival rates for some specific cancers have genuinely improved, while arguing that for many of the most aggressive and advanced cancers, progress has been incremental at best, and that some widely used treatments cause as much suffering as the disease itself. Rather than ending on pure criticism, Dr. Naumov pivots to what he sees as the more promising frontier: dietary and lifestyle research connecting specific cancers to specific modifiable risk factors. He points to research linking pancreatic cancer with high consumption of red meat, butter, and dairy fat, and notes that even how AIDS progresses in the body can be meaningfully affected by a patient's dietary choices. His argument is that prevention-focused research, while less dramatic than a miracle cure headline, may ultimately matter more than the next round of expensive late-stage treatment. That brings us to Chapter 13, Health is Wealth, which Dr. Naumov treats as one of the central chapters of the entire book. He opens with a comparison that's hard to forget once you hear it. He compares the way big banks operate: manufactured shortages of deposit slips designed to funnel you toward a personal banker who cross-sells investment products, minimum balance fees, ballooning credit card rates, to where he sees healthcare heading. A simple visit for a sore throat, he argues, increasingly turns into a cascade of referrals: a pathology lab, a specialist appointment, a recommendation for an expensive new medication, you didn't ask about. His point isn't that every doctor is acting in bad faith. It's that the financial architecture surrounding modern medicine, like modern banking, often nudges a simple transaction toward becoming a much more profitable one. From there, Dr. Naumov walks through the history of the FDA and its relationship with the pharmaceutical industry. The agency was created in 1906 in the wake of Upton Sinclair's exposure of the meatpacking industry, a genuinely positive piece of progressive-era reform. But Dr. Naumov argues that over the following century, the FDA's drug approval process became deeply intertwined with the same medical education system the Rockefeller Foundation had helped build. A system where, since natural and non-patentable substances can't generate the kind of return that a patented pharmaceutical can, there's been little financial incentive to seriously research or promote them, regardless of their actual effectiveness. He spends meaningful time here on a genuinely real, ongoing public health debate, the fluoridation and chlorination of municipal drinking water. He acknowledges the documented benefit. Fluoridation has been associated with a significant reduction in childhood cavities, while also pointing to studies raising concerns about elevated cancer risk in animal studies, and to the long-running, legitimate scientific debate over whether the health trade-offs of adding these chemicals to public water at scale has been fully and honestly weighed. This is a real area of ongoing scientific disagreement, and Dr. Naumov presents it as exactly that, a debate, not a settled conspiracy. He turns next to what he sees as the perverse incentive structure inside cancer treatment specifically. His argument is direct. Hospitals generate revenue from sick patients, not healthy ones, and a chronic, long-running disease that requires repeated treatment over years is, financially speaking, far more valuable to the system than a quick, complete cure. He's careful to say this isn't necessarily a matter of individual doctors consciously choosing profit over patients. Many oncologists, he notes, are genuinely compassionate people. His critique is aimed at the structure of the system itself, which he argues rewards chronic management far more than it rewards a fast, full recovery. And then the chapter shifts into something more personal. Dr. Naumov's own philosophy as a doctor of chiropractic. His stated goal, in his own words, is to empower people to take control of their own health, filling their minds with positive thoughts and nurturing their bodies through proper attention to nutrition, posture, and exercise. He acknowledges plainly that the body doesn't always cooperate, that things do go wrong, and when they do, his advice is to get educated about the underlying cause, explore natural remedies where they genuinely apply, and seek guidance when you reach a real impasse. This leads into some of the most concrete, actionable advice in the whole book. Dr. Naumov makes the case for telemedicine as a massively underused tool, pointing out that a very large share of the reasons people visit a doctor's office in person could realistically be resolved over a simple phone or video call at a fraction of the cost and hassle. He encourages listeners to actually research their own symptoms and conditions, to talk openly with friends and family about health experiences, and to treat their doctor as a knowledgeable partner and friend, not as an infallible authority to blindly defer to. And here, Dr. Naumov draws some careful, deliberate lines that are worth hearing in full because they show this book isn't simply anti-medicine. He's explicit that he is not telling anyone to rely on prayer or positive thinking in place of a trained surgeon for something like a broken leg or a gunshot wound. Modern medicine, he says plainly, has real, irreplaceable value in those situations. And on vaccines specifically, he takes a notably measured position. He says he is not telling anyone whether to vaccinate or not vaccinate their children. His actual advice is to study the available research on efficacy and potential side effects for any vaccine that's become a subject of public debate. Weigh the risks against the benefits with that information in hand and reach the decision that's right for your own family. The thread running through this entire chapter, and really this entire book, comes down to one idea Dr. Naumov keeps returning to. Your health is fundamentally your own responsibility, not your doctor's, not the government's, not an insurance company's. He argues that healthcare decisions should be made from a place of calm reason rather than fear, and that the most empowered patient is the one who stays curious, stays informed, and treats their doctor as a collaborator rather than a guru to be obeyed without question. That's it for Episode 7 of Generation Sick, our biggest episode yet, covering Chapters 11, 12, and 13. If today's episode left you thinking differently about how you'll handle your next visit to the doctor, what questions you'll actually ask, how much research you'll do beforehand, that's exactly the shift this book is trying to create. In the next episode, we keep moving forward. If you want to be there when it drops, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. And if today's episode gave you something to think about, share it with someone who needs to hear it. That's how we restore the power to the people, one listener at a time. I'm narrating Generation Sick by Dr. Vic Naumov. I'll see you in Episode 8.